He works in the development sector across different countries in the world, and he's now with Bowling Green State University, and he'll be talking to us about, of course the topic is here, but he'll be basically talking about development communication and the potential it holds for people who work in the communication sector. And I'd like to just give a little brief about this initiative which IMC has taken up along with Center for Communication and Change, India chapter, which is under the auspice of Johns Hopkins University, Baltimore, USA. And I'm happy that Pradeep Krishna Rai, who heads their research outfit in India, has agreed, and we also collaborated in the joint effort to hold one of the first series of lectures, and it was a good, timely thing that Professor Srinivas is in Delhi, and we decided to have this joint collaborative lecture by Srinivas Melkote, and I'll invite Pradeep to introduce and talk a little bit about the work of Professor Srinivas, and then we can begin with the lecture.
As it often happens, it's the driver who took us to some other place instead of coming here to IMC. It's a pretty well-known place, but for some reasons drivers don't seem to know where IMC is. Thank you, Geeta. I think it's a wonderful opportunity that CCCI, which is Center for Communication and Change India, and IMC have gotten together and have planned to organize a series of lectures, and we are so happy that Professor Melkote is with here. So on behalf of Indian Institute of Mass Communication and Center for Communication and Change India, I'm happy to extend a very hearty and a warm welcome to Professor Melkote to New Delhi as well as to IMC. Thank you, Srinivas, for being so ready to come here and make your presentation. Professor Melkote is known to all teachers present here, I assume. He has known several of us, worked with some of us, and has been cited by most of us. If you are working in the area of development communication in India and elsewhere, you cannot avoid him. His scholarship and charm is irresistible. Like our gracious host, Dr. Geeta Bamizai, Dr. Melkote's academic career began in the 1970s. Both of them have been teaching for close to 40 years now. Both of them stayed at one academic institution for a greater part of their academic life. Dr. Melkote at BGSU and Dr. Geeta Bamizai at IMC. Professor Melkote, though, exemplifies what USA does to Indian students of communication who prefer to work in that country. He has authored 7 books, contributed over 20 book chapters, and written over 60 research articles in national and international refereed communication research journals. At one time, his book on development communication was a textbook in several universities in 14 countries. I assume those number of countries would have only gone up and wouldn't have come down since he wrote his first book. Professor Melkote was a commended nominee at the 2013 Communication for Social Change Award by the University of Queensland in Australia. He has received the Outstanding Contribution to Graduate Education Award finalist, BGSU, which is Bowling Green State University, in April 2012. 2 of his publications have won international acclaim. He received the, and if I pronounce this Srinivas correctly, Equid Novi Award for the best paper in journalism research at AEJMC International Communication Division, San Francisco, in the year 2006. And finally, his paper was top 3 faculty research papers at the International Communication Division, AEJMC Annual Conference, San Francisco in, my God, this is a misprint, I printed the same thing twice, but some other year I assume. Several of us, who are teaching communication in this country have, he has supervised, I think some of us here. I happen to be his PhD, student, maybe in the year of the Lord, 1996. Passed out in 1996, actually. And some of them in the academic institutions all over the country are his students. So I'm so happy that Melkote is here, and I request Professor Melkote to make this presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to come here and speak to all of you. This happened quite suddenly, and Dr. Pradeep Krishna Rai has always been very supportive of activities in India, he makes sure that I make at least one presentation somewhere. Maybe Bangalore, it may be Hyderabad, it might be Delhi. Anyway, now that he has painted such a rosy picture of me, I guess I have to live up to that. I'll try my best. Development communication has been an area in which I have worked, as Dr. Krishnatri said, for since 1975. Some of you might have read in your books that in the year 1975-76, India had a program called SITE, Satellite Instructional Television Experiment. It ran for 1 year, from the middle of 75 to the middle of 76. I was a master's student at Bangalore University under Professor Eapen. We were 6 of us, and it was, I think, one of the first masters that put a lot of emphasis on both theory and research. So he made each one of us write a thesis on some aspect of sight. And that bug, development communication, has been with me since then. And I have consistently worked in that area. I went to University of Iowa in 1980 to earn a master's and a PhD. And I was so lucky to work under an African professor, Dr. Joseph Ascroft, from the country of Malawi. And he was a development communication, he's retired, development communication expert. But he brought the unique insight of a practitioner, an area where I probably lacked. And so it was wonderful 4 years working under him and looking at problems in a different way. And so that is how I got started. And when I started to teach in 1984, there was no textbook or a resource book in development communication. So I thought that maybe it's a good idea to write one, and I wrote my first edition in 1991. And to my pleasant surprise, it was very well received. And that's where the journey starts. And it's probably, so how are we going to advance the slide? Okay, thank you. So I'm going to do a variety of things in the 45 minutes that I have. I have prepared a PowerPoint, and the PowerPoint actually, as you can see from the title, talks more about where are we today and where should we be going, what should we be doing in terms of development, communication, activities, theory, models, etc. However, Dr. Krishnatri and Dr. Geeta have advised me that I give a little bit of introduction to what happened before, which is not in this PowerPoint. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to be mixing up, and so that I also give you a background to this field if you're not very familiar. Yeah. Okay, let's start way back when countries like India and were becoming independent, and we're looking at the mid-1940s. And these countries, starting with Asia and then on to Africa, were becoming independent after centuries of colonial rule under the British, the French, the Dutch, and the others. They were seriously underdeveloped because of the colonization. And anyways, so around 1940, there was this belief that all of these countries and societies must become like the Western countries, look like United States or Germany or France or England, and basically we uncritically accepted. I didn't do that, did I? Uncritically accepted this idea that development is to become like one of the Western countries. And I'm going to call that as the dominant paradigm. And so between 1940, around 1940s, all the way through the 1970s, this idea that we should become like them. And so it was a model that stressed mass media, because people are not developed because they don't know. Let's just go and tell them. And let's go and tell people, no, maybe you should not have too many children, just have 2 children, and then they will know. Or tell people, you must eat green leafy vegetables every day. They don't know. We do tell them, and we tell them, they know, and then they'll do it. Very simplistic approach, top-down approach, source-driven approach, where the receivers were never consulted. Other than being receivers, they were just passive receivers. And so you had an era where this kind of models were very popular, and it was also very, the indicators were all quantitative indicators like GNP and GDP and per capita consumption and all of those things. Qualitative indicators were not there. So, and 1960s is called the first development decade, and this was very popular, and definitely in India. Prime Minister Nehru was a big believer of 5-year plans and top-down planning and to industrialize the country. At one point, I remember reading somewhere that President Nehru said, India's temple is the factory. So from that one sentence, you can get an idea of the mindset of that time, industrialization. I'm not casting any value judgments here, but that's basically how it was. The role of media was basically the mass media were entrusted with most of the tasks, both radio, mostly radio, since radio belonged to All India Radio, the government. And newspapers also in India have always had a very healthy interest in development issues. And so basically, this was top-down mass communication. And so that's the, but what happened by the time we came to the mid-70s was there was a great deal of disappointment because we really hadn't achieved a whole lot. And poverty was not going away, and underdevelopment was not going away. And so basically, there was a rethink in the 1970s, mostly from Latin American scholars and then Asian scholars and African scholars, looking realistically at who are we, what should be the outcome of development for us, should we become like another Western country, is it even possible? Each country should set its own goals in terms of what kind of development it requires. So it was a more reflective and critical approach that we started to see starting around the late 1980s. And also there was more interest now in not just top-down communication, but participatory communication, and how to bring receivers into the process. Communication model, the receivers have to be active, and so the models, new models were looked at from top down. The people were looking at horizontal models where there is no hierarchy. Also respect for the life experiences of those people that we thought don't have much to contribute. Like you look at a peasant, like a farmer in a village, what can he contribute to you? I am from a university, I have a degree in organic chemistry. What can this old man tell me? Oh, that is a mindset that I know everything and the other person knows nothing. That has changed a whole lot starting in the late 70s, that everybody has different kinds of experiences. And to make a project sustainable and local, you have to involve the local people. So that has been a very interesting period, in the 90s, 80s, 90s. And I think we have come a full turn now, and there is no project, whether it be United Nations projects or government projects, where participatory communication strategies and models are not used. So we have crossed that. And that brings me closer to the last 20 years. And then we entered the 1990s, another fantastic decade. Now, 1990s brought new kinds of issues. It started to bring in internet, www. It brought globalization, or at least the kind of globalization that we see today. It all started in the 1990s in a small way, and we have participated in that. When I was a grad student in 1984, I would sit in front of Commodore 64. I don't know how many of you have seen Commodore 64. You can take one innings of sleep and come back, and still it'll be going tuk, 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 tuk. For us, it was like in wonderment, we were looking at that. We have come a long way. So, new media technologies, swifter communication, more connectivity, all of this which has facilitated globalization. And we are now today in the thick of it. Certainly we don't know where it's going to go, but definitely we are in the age of globalization. So 90s and 2000s have brought these kinds of challenges, and that brings me to where we are today as far as the field is concerned. And by the way, I have a co-author. This is from one of my latest books called Communication for Development. I brought it along because it is so new. It's just a month or two old. And this is from Sage Publications in New Delhi. I'll have a few flyers here. Mr. Shambhu is here from Sage, and he'll put some flyers there. My co-author and I argue that from a critical point of view, academic scholars still do not have a very good grasp of how to theorize or understand the reality of the conditions today around the globe. And I'm going to elaborate on this in just a minute. That is because globalization is comparatively new from an academic standpoint. In fact, 20 years ago, you hardly saw the term globalization being used in the social sciences. Okay, so globalization, and if you have read some of the globalization theorists, they look at the world in a very different way from what was looked at in the earlier models, and asking new questions and posing new challenges. And that's where the old academic scholars have a problem, because the theory and the models and the mindset that we have used previously may be inadequate or maybe irrelevant, but I would say inadequate to the present situation. So that is a big challenge, and the context in which I would like to place this is we are right now, if you have not sensed it already, we are in what is called as the second Gilded Age. The first Gilded Age was the 1920s. Gilded Age is where there is extreme inequality in wealth and income between people in a country and between countries. And if maybe you want to pick up some history book and read about the roaring 1920s. It was it ended very badly. The 1929 stock market crash brought about economic depression that lasted 10 years. We are now very much there. Economic indicators show that the Gini coefficient measures the amount of inequality, 0 being perfect equality and 1 being perfect inequality. And the preferred Gini ratio would be 0.4. Right now we are close to 0.6. And between 0.4 and 0.6, it might look like just a difference of 0.2, but in terms of the Gini scale, that is enormous. And we have had some groundbreaking books. The last year we had Thomas Piketty write about, it is considered to be a Bible. After Marx's book, they say it is the, and in fact the title of the book, I'm very bad remembering titles, the title of his book, Piketty, P-I-K-K-E-T-T-Y, Thomas Piketty, resembles the book of Karl Marx. The title kind of rhymes with that. So that is my focus. I want to focus that because that is a problem right now. Yeah. Am I producing a feedback? That is our immediate goal. And that, yeah. Those are some of the, and of course I'm interested in development communication, sometimes called as development support communication. And how can we make it relevant to today's conditions in a global world? And so in order to touch on these things, I will get started with some of the systemic issues that are affecting the field and then move on. In terms of systemic issues, by the way, let me talk very briefly one more time. We are in the 21st century, and a certain kind of government, regardless of whether it's a democracy or a dictatorship or a religious theocracy, doesn't matter. Most countries today are using what is called as the neoliberal economic model, which is very similar to the neoclassical, which is basically, what is called as the trickle-down economics. You have to help the capitalists who will create the infrastructure and the jobs and benefit everybody. It's the good old capitalistic philosophy. But what makes neoliberal different from neoclassical is neoliberal puts all the eggs in one basket. Freedom of the individual. In a neoliberal model, the individual is absolutely free to do what he or she wants. Individual pursuit. And so in a neoliberal model, what is going to happen is the emphasis is going to be on individuals and not on groups, a community, a family, a society. And it reduces things to individual pursuit. And you can see that being played out in countries like the United States and other countries also. That has taken, it's also there in China. That is the model that is right now dominating our global, institutions and governments. And by the way, we had exactly the same situation in the 1920s. It ended badly in 1929. It ended quite badly, but not as badly in 2008. Luckily, we didn't go down to the depths of what happened in 1929. Somehow we escaped the ultimate depression, but it took a very, very big toll on the world economy. And we have still not learned lessons from that because inequality is going up to an unsustainable level. So that is the context. And on the far side, that is on your right, that is the curve for different countries, as you can see. The dark green is United States, and I have Britain, Germany, France, Sweden. I have other countries. I also have South Africa, which is not in this map. Now look at, that is the Gini curve on the I'm sorry, on the right is the top 1% of the population, the top 1% earners of the population. How much of the national income did they earn? So if you go to the 1920s and look at the green curve, you will see almost close to 0.65, close to 25. So 1% of the population owned as much as 25% of the population. This is the 1920s. Notice what happens after 1920s. It keeps gradually coming down and hits a low point around 1975. This was the period we had depression and then Second World War. And after Second World War, most of the countries adopted a system called Keynesian economic system. Keynesian economic system is also a capitalistic model, but it puts a lot of emphasis on welfare of the community. The government must do its share to make sure that there is no absolute poverty. It must have a social welfare responsibility. That is Keynesianism. Under Keynesianism, notice how it came down. And it's not a coincidence that Keynesianism was replaced by neoliberal economics around 1975. The experiment was done in Chile under the dictator Pinochet. That was the lab experiment done. And then Reagan became president in US, Thatcher became Prime Minister of England, and they brought in neoliberal models. And notice how again the curve just picks up and keeps going up, up and up. And around 2008, when the second crisis occurred, notice 1% of the population is again earning close to 25%. It still is quite high, and so that is, and this is what you're going to see anytime, any figure you call up, go on the net and get this. This is the kind of thing you're going to see. So anyway, that's just what I explained to you just now. Okay, next. So basically, what my colleague and I are interested in is there are a lot of risks and dangers that are differentially distributed around the globe. I'll just give you one or two examples, but I don't want to talk about everything. I just want to talk. For example, I had a long taxi drive from the airport. I was taken aback by the fog. I've never seen anything like that in my life. I'm sure for you it's a daily grind in January. I was taken aback. None of the leaves on any tree was green. Everything had a cake of brown on it. And I've been reading in the papers about pollution levels in Delhi. Who bears the risk of bad air? Okay. The poor, the downtrodden, their health suffers more because they face the elements. A lot of the cooking outside cities is done by burning firewood. One of the most dangerous practices because the particle levels of dust in the smoke is so tiny that it can go into the deepest parts of your lung And so there are lots of other risks, but I don't want to talk about all that. All I want to say is that the socioeconomic status of the person is directly proportional to the amount of risk that you face because of all the changes that are taking place. But basically, what I want to talk about is the risks and dangers that are differentially distributed across the globe between people in countries and between countries, and what to do about it. Yeah. This is some more stuff about the neoliberal globalization. Again, one other way to look at neoliberal is a lot of emphasis is again being put on private property owners and entrepreneurs and banks and corporations, and they get preferential treatment compared to other groups such as universities, higher education institutions, the social sector is what I mean. And at least in the United States, any attempt made to lift an entire community up is looked down upon. The Republicans who have power in the lower house and the upper house, they have complete majority. They make sure that nothing that Obama does gets passed. I think it might be similar here also. Nothing gets passed. One of the signature events that he did was what is called as Obamacare. It is health care. One of the richest countries in the world, 60% of the people cannot afford to pay medical bills because it is so expensive. The only developed country that does not have health insurance provided by the government or some social service organization for the marginalized people. And that's basically what he did. And they have been trying to defeat it so many times. And just day before yesterday, they tried one more time. Here is a program that's, after 2 years, the figures look very good. 20 million Americans are now have health insurance, which they did not have earlier. But yet, the neoliberal part says, no, that's not good. People should decide what they want. Government should not, So here is this dilemma of this neoliberal, the planning and control by the state to achieve socially agreed upon objectives is increasingly seen as an attack on individual freedom. So basically, what are the alternatives to neoliberal agenda? Right now, we don't seem to have any kind of an alternate kind of agenda. What should be the place and role of development communication in that? Okay, now those are the two questions that I will attempt to grapple in the next few minutes. But before I answer that, I wanted to talk about two systemic problems that I told you earlier. One of them is called methodological nationalism. Basically, to put it in very plain English, where the unit of the problem, the unit of analysis is a country, nation, country. So that is what we have had since the 1940s. Even now, United Nations, the membership is only for countries, right? So it's countries. But with globalization, this idea of a supreme country has taken a bit of a beating, all right? Politically, yes, countries are still important. They're members of United Nations. They have armies. They have a lot of money. They have a lot of power. Yes, yes, yes. But globalization, with the connectivity that we have, which don't respect any national borders, the global, village is very different. However, the models and the theory that we have all been fed in sociology, in political science, okay, in economics, some of the solid social sciences, their models, their theories have always been with countries as units of analysis. And so when we approach globalization, this kind of mindset is going to be inadequate, all right? Why should a country always be the only unit of analysis? Okay, on cultural matters, for example. Why should a country be unit of analysis? Take India. We are a multicultural country. We speak so many languages. So many parts of our country, the cultures are so diverse, so rich, so beautiful, thousands of years old. But then you put on that country, we are a country. The languages are Hindi, English. Air India is the national airline. Peacock is the national bird, etc., etc., etc. And then somebody would say, from a cultural point of view, that may not make a lot of sense. And when I used to live in India, Doordarshan, national program, starting at 8 p.m., was switched to New Delhi. Entire country had to watch it only in Hindi. Now, some of you in this room may not have a problem with that, but there are many parts in South India where they just do not understand Hindi. They have their own languages. Okay? And notice what happened after 1985, when we had the Asian Games, and how in 1992, Star TV came with 4 English channels, and then it took off. And today, look at the diversity in our cable, the languages, it's beautiful, especially for a multi. So people ask about cultural issues, okay? And therefore, maybe at least from an academic point of view, from a critical point of view, we should expand our horizons and think in new ways and think from a global, local point of view. So those are some of the issues that comes under this methodological nationalism, basically that countries don't have to always be units of analysis. And so this brings up, without going into too much into global and local, today in globalization theories, there is this distinction between global and local. Of course, it's very difficult to say where local ends and global begins, but local and global, we are talking about more decentralized, smaller units than countries, all right? And it is possible now. Now we have, how many people are subscribed to in the world to Facebook? Just give a figure. I don't know, I'm asking you. It runs into several million. Like 200 million? 300 million? Facebook. But what is Facebook? Facebook is just a collection of your social contacts. You might know somebody on your Facebook social media much, much, much more than your neighbor or the governor of your state. Okay, so in other words, today, because of increased connectivity, many kinds of affiliations are possible. And now, strength is going back to local areas. Earlier, local areas were isolated because they were not part of that mainstream process which was always in cities and major, urban areas. Now, because of internet and new communication technologies like smartphones and cell phones, isolation is slowly coming to an end. And poverty is not just economic, or rather, your geographical isolation is directly related to your economic standing. The more geographically isolated you are, the lower the chances of you, advancing economically. So bringing networks and allowing local areas to, when I say local areas, it will be local issues, different kinds of issues and stuff like that can be aired out on the internet. And there's easier chance to meet up with similar groups across the country, across the world, and form coalitions. Okay? For example, the World Social Forum is basically a collection of organizations and communities across the world. And therefore, there's a lot of benefit, especially for us in communication, to look at the world from a lens that doesn't necessarily have to be a country. The other one, the second structural problem in our theories, I mentioned this when we got started, that we should all become, in the old days, we should all become like United States. That is development. So basically this kind of model, I'm going to use this big term called teleology. This is a term from history, which basically means that societies move from an undeveloped state to a developed state. The path is straight. It goes only in one direction, from a state of undevelopment to a state of development. Okay? And then when you reach the end of the road, you are developed. Happiness. Enjoy. Like you reach the end. That bias is called the teleology bias. Now today, among the postmodernists and others, there is no straight path to change. Who said there's a straight path? Who gets to make that decision? The change is continuous. It's going on all the time. Powerful groups use their power, either politically or economically or religiously or whatever, to make social change desirable from their interests, whatever it might be, good or bad. And that's how it has been. Which means the more power you have in society, the better chances to tweak social change in a direction that will be desirable to you and your group. So social change is a highly contested process. It is not automatic. It doesn't go in straight line. Actually, you can go ahead and you can fall back. Okay? And so this is the new thinking now. And so that old idea that somehow the models of, in economics in the 1960s was, you go from stage 1 to stage 2, and this is stage 2. And after stage 2, you go to stage 3, and this is what stage 3 is. And then you go to stage 4. It looks like a beautiful structured model. Social change doesn't take place like that. There are all kinds of real life cultural issues that come. And anyway, so that is, so this whole idea that and then when you reach the end, you have reached. Nobody has ever reached everlasting, because change is continuous. You have to be continuously changing. You can't go and say, okay, I'm developed now. Okay? So that whole idea now is, by the way, it's very strong in sociology, which is the mother for communication studies. Okay, we have derived a lot of our thinking from sociology, and as far as the society is concerned. And all right, so those are the two biases. Told you just now what we think. Change is an open-ended process where there are no guarantees of achieving specific outcomes. It's constant, it's sustained, it's contested engagement and struggle by actors negotiating for specific changes and direction at local, national, local, or global sites. Okay, so these ideas have come through globalization and the whole connectivity, and what this is making possible is, I think I had a title earlier, cosmopolitan politics. For example, in the 1990s, I believe, in southern part of Mexico, the Zapatista Indian community was being persecuted by the Mexican government. They wanted to shift all of them and move them away to develop that area. Somebody there managed to get this is in the 1990s, managed to get their story to the internet. What the Mexican government and the army was doing to the Zapatista community. It went viral in the 1990s. And there was such condemnation from groups all over the world who felt themselves similar to the Zapatistas, or what was being done to them as being unfair. The Mexican army withdrew. Now, maybe this is just an example. It's a beautiful example, but it tells you something, that politics can be cosmopolitan. There are groups of people who might speak different languages, who might live in different countries, but they may have similar economic, social values. For example, labor class, blue-collar workers, electricians, plumbers in India will share a lot of values with plumbers and electricians in the United States. Okay? And it is becoming a global norm now. So countries like India now are also looking seriously at net neutrality. That is, providers of content on the net, on internet, should not discriminate between the content providers. Like if you pay more money, your content will move faster. You cannot do that. That's net neutrality. So, in other words, today in globalization, it is possible, because of the connectivity, to influence through cosmopolitan politics. So basically then, next one. This is a model that I used from Giddens, and here, notice on the left and right are global and local, the two, important components of globalization. And top and bottom are, what do we mean by development? Now, one of them at the bottom says emancipatory politics. This has been what we always have understood development to be. That is, people should have access to food, clean water, shelter, basic education, basic health care. You all know what that is. So let's put a label on that. That's called emancipatory politics. That every human being has the right to food, to clean water, to shelter, health care, basic education. But now with globalization, or in the 21st century, we are facing another area. Development doesn't have to be only survival issues. Yes, food is important, clean water is important, nobody is denying that. But as human beings, we want to live full lives as expressive individuals. And I'm not talking of terrorism and all of that. You know, I want to go and burn a bus or something like that. No, I'm not talking about that. Like, we all have, we want to be different things. We want to fulfill. And now, in the 21st century, that is becoming very important. Look at the politics in the United States. Just 6 months ago, the homosexuals, that is the gay people, finally got the right to marry. And a lot of European countries, they can marry. That is, 2 women can marry, 2 men can marry. So this is not food, water issue. This is identity issue. Right? Like that, you have other kinds of identities. I only chose gay as an example. So in the 21st century, we are moving in that direction. Some people call this as post-development. Post-development issues are becoming very important now. Identity is becoming very important. So this is the model that we have used for this is the theoretical framework that we have used for the model that I'm going to show you for the role of development in today's context, is that our model should deal with the diversity in the world, global, local, okay? And at the same time, it should look at the old issues of development, that is access to resources, but also life politics, all right? And so that has been our, yeah, this is basically what, yeah, go ahead, next one. And another point we make, and I'll show you the model in just a minute, is participatory communication is good, but we need to move beyond that. Because participatory communication basically says that the receiver and the source must have equal status in the communication relationship. And because that is good. But unless participation leads to social and political action, no change can take place on the ground. Social and political action is very important because it goes back to what I was saying. Social change is a highly contested process. In a contested process, you need to have, you know, the power to change the process, all right? And therefore, you must enter, or at least development communicators must help people enter the arena of social and political action. Now, it's easier said than done. I agree. I'm an academic. All I do is teach and write papers. But social and political action, politically, is very risky. It invites challenges, violence. But I understand that. But from an academic point of view, you know, is where we write about these issues, is that social and political action is important. Otherwise, you can be participating and talking to each other forever. No changes, not much change is going to take place. And therefore, so basically, putting all of these things here is that what should be the role of development communication in today's world? On the one hand, there are still lots of people who don't have access to resources like food, water, medicine. Yes, that is still there. But on the other hand, we also have other issues that 21st century has brought on us. So development support communication has to deal with all of these issues. At the same time, we cannot be looking at countries as units of analysis all the time. We have to look at global implications, simply because internet is not going to go away. Okay? In fact, we are going to get more connected in the future than less connected. And therefore, that is, we need to look at this whole thing in the new lens now. Global, local, and global. When you go on Facebook, you are global. Okay, so we have so many different sites now. And that's where we feel that development communication should, what role it should play. We have derived a lot of knowledge and inspiration from different social movements. We have studied different social movements. We looked at the labor movement in Western countries in the 19th and 20th century. Feminist movements in the mid-20th century. Peace movements. Civil rights movements all over the world, including, Mahatma Gandhi. His was a civil rights movement. Martin Luther King Jr. in the United States, who brought about greater equality between blacks and whites, and ecology-related movements. So we studied all of these movements and learned as much as possible of what is it they wanted, how did they go about doing it, and how did they use media and communication. But what is important for us is not these historical movements, but today, civil rights movements around the world. And so civil society movements are movements that are started by ordinary people living in villages and cities, and who are forming themselves into constituencies, and which could be local, which could be global, and basically trying to make changes to their lives, to their part of society. This is what civil society movements is. For example, today, as an outsider coming into India, I was looking at the backs of many buses, and it said, what did it say? It said in Hindi, something something mahan hai. A girl's life is. I saw the same slogans behind buses in Mysore yesterday. Okay, now that is a civil society movement that's going on now to bring dignity to the lives of young women. They have a right to live, work, walk safely. It's a right. And so, but then it's not going to come to you just because it's a right. You have to fight for it. Social, political action, civil rights movements. And so if you take that point of view, there's so much of opportunities around to make different kinds of small changes. And the heart of all this is communication. How to come together, how to work together, and how to produce content together. All right? And so this has given us a lot of energy in terms of our model. And of course, we are interested in emancipatory politics. It is still very much there. For example, quite a few civil rights movements have, done these things, reclaiming of the commons. Commons, for example. Air, water, land. It belongs to all of us. But yet you go to Goa, there's miles of beach in Goa is not available to you. It belongs to some hotel or some resort, and you cannot go there. There'll be big boards that says violators will be prosecuted. But think about it. Beach, given to us by God. So like that, reclaiming of the commons, and there are many civil society movements that are working on that. Anyway, I don't want to go over the whole list. And then the other side I was telling you, one is emancipatory politics, the other is identity politics. And here, today, in this global world today, we face, we have several civil society movements that are looking at people's political identities, social identities, religious identities, and for example, this whole idea of giving gender, giving girls and women as much power as boys and men, that is nothing but gender identity. And so this is another issue. So putting all this together, we came together with this, we put together this model. This is a heuristic model. Heuristic model means something to look at and think and reflect. It's not an operational model that you can use to start a process. So we have POD, and if you go to the extreme right, what should be the outcomes, the goals of quote-unquote development, social change. And we use social justice in our book as a very important criterion. And we have operationalized 2 outcomes. Establish structures, arrangements, practices, rules, policies which value and establish equity in claims and access to resources and rights of communities and other stakeholders. Okay, so I was telling you about food, water, all of these are resources. The other one is life politics, establish structures, arrangements, practices, rules, policies which value and provide choice and opportunity to enhance capacity and capability of all individuals, communities, and other stakeholders. So we are using these 2. We have operationalized these 2 as the best representative of what we want. Again, somebody else could come and operationalize that in a different way. What are some of the outcomes or goals of communicative action, that is development communication, that will help bring about those final outcomes? And in the middle we have some outcomes for communicative actions that can help bring about vibrant democratic public sphere, reclaiming democracy from power holders, active public discussion and debate, public mass media support for equity and diversity, empowered communities, civil society groups and coalitions, creation and assertion of new actors, new places, new ideas, new practices, new identities, new voices. So you go down that list, we think these are some important outcomes that all communication for change people have to keep in mind. And at the bottom we have social and political action. That's very important. Now, what are specific communication activities that can help bring about some of the outcomes in the middle? And we have a whole list of activities that include both emancipatory politics as well as life politics. And some of these are already familiar in the literature. We have added a few extra ones. For example, we have social mobilization, information politics. Information politics is very, very important today, especially in the day of the internet. I am a member of the Democratic Party in the United States. I get an average of 20 emails every day from the Democratic committee, DCCC, on some issue or the other, and asking me to sign this petition, sign that petition, make your voice heard on gun law, make your voice heard on something else. What is that? Information politics, very important. Media mobilization, we have to bring the mainstream media to support us. You cannot do without them. And then, of course, advocacy communication, networking, empowerment communication. And I've also included resistance communication, something we don't talk about in academic books, but it's very important. Resistance communication, demonstrations, strikes, sit-ins, vigils, street art. These are all examples of resistance communication. So these are different aspects. And then community mobilization. You can add to this, as I said, this is just the beginning. So it gives us something to work for. And this whole thing, again, I don't want to make the same mistake of talking of stage 1, stage 2, stage 3. It doesn't imply that it is a linear process. It doesn't imply that you're going from one stage to another. Basically, if you look at the arrow on the top, it goes circle. So, you know, one could affect the other and the other could affect this. So we maintain that. So notice the arrows don't go from left to right, but act to go in a circle. And the whole thing is set within a macro and micro perspective. So all of these activities we are talking about, you could imagine them at the macro level of this country or a certain global level. You can also look at some of these at the very micro levels, like in urban communities or in rural communities. And then again, even that, it is not, you know, it's not a dichotomy, it is a continuous loop. So that's where we are thinking, and this is what we have put across. And so basically to sum up this whole thing is that as development communicators, we have to be very concerned about issues, the traditional issues related to development. It is access of all citizens to resources that are important for them and their children to develop so that they are producing a better, you know, with each generation it's getting better. That's very important. But now today, with globalization, whether we like it or not, we have other issues which we call as post-development. And again, and there are many issues here, and those are also important. And we need to be looking at these things. Thank you.